Who's
that's.
that one for?
I don't know.
Who is that thumb?
Oh, that's Eve's by you. That's Casey Lemons.
Okay.
Huh? Yeah. Okay. You're all still here.
I am just going to thank the Alloy Orchestra. And we want to call out Terry Donahue and Ken Winokur. And Nate's going to call out the rest of the guests, but I just wanted to thank you. I think that was one of my favorites, actually. It's weird. It was just, was it? Yeah. I loved it. The thing I wanted the audience to know is we actually locked down their appearance here first before we chose any other movies for the festival. We wanted to make sure they could come back because they have to travel, I think, to Europe after this. Leaving tomorrow morning, and so we, months ago, and is this your 15th or 16th appearance? 16. And I just wanted today to extend the invitation for you to come back next year. So, okay, thank you. I'm going to leave the rest of it to Nate.
Hi. Yeah, take a microphone. You remember Richard Newport, who introduced the film? Yeah. And to moderate the discussion, we have Michael Barker from Sony Pictures Classics, a perennial visitor to Ebertfest.
Thank you. That is one crazy movie, isn't it? Best movie ever made with the worst acting of all time. There's so many questions to ask about this movie. Can you tell us something about Mr. L'Herbier?
Yeah, in the intro, I just went briefly over some of the things about him, but actually one big French historian, years after he died, I think, said, L'Herbier's biggest problem was he overestimated the taste of his audience. There was a sense that, he just thought that people would really be pulled into this world, and I think there's a quote in there too that he did want to have the sense that, especially during this period, El Dorado and L'Argent and a couple of his other movies, he wanted people to feel like this was the cusp of a whole new era in cinema, and that he was really pulling us, into a whole different world. So he did have somebody who just really, as kind of mentioned before, he had a faith in that the cinema communicates somehow that no other medium can. But he also was very unrealistic, and especially a film like this, apparently, he had to make it with this actress because she put up half the money, and what she thought was half the money became like she had to keep putting more and more in. It became pure folly, he even admitted by the end.
But what I had heard about him was that, first of all, he came from this wealthy background, and he had done everything under the sun as far as different disciplines, and he knew so many subjects. He hung out with these people like Jean Cocteau, and I feel in this movie what I've read about him was that he and his pals, their goal was, in this avant-garde sort of way, because they were all avant-gardists, was to somehow take the highbrow art, which is what they were all into, it was very elitist, and this populist art, which was the movies. They were into action movies, and I heard that he was inspired by the Cecil B. DeMille movie, The Cheat, and it was his idea with this movie was he was going to get the the highbrows and the lowbrows in and make the ultimate movie so everyone would love it, and it was a disaster.
Well, and you can see the lowbrow part. I think with the car, the driving and things like that. I mean, that's right out of almost Keystone Cops. He's got almost Buster Keaton kind of. He's influenced by a wide variety of world cinema too. And there's the Caligari stuff with the sort of that weird green kind of greenhouse, whatever room it's supposed to be, with the big, looks like rubber floppy things, looks like something out of Caligari. So he's influenced by Expressionism and the high arts and Impressionism, but you're right, popular art as well. But he did hang out with Marcel Proust, was a good friend. That whole show, and actually the two experts in the world on this movie are sitting next to me here, because nobody has seen this movie as many times as you. And certainly I want to hear your insights. But when they did the theater at the Champs-Élysées, they really rented out the theater, and all the art world came and packed it. So all those angry people who are, get off the stage yelling at her, or she's the greatest, and that big fight scene, apparently Picasso, all kinds of people were in the audience.
I heard that James Joyce was in that audience, and Ezra Pound, and Man Ray, and all of these people.
Kiki.
He invited 2,000 people from the film and art world to come and be a rabble-rousing crowd while they shot.
And I think if they weren't invited in there, they pretended afterwards they had been there, because they didn't want to be the one artist who wasn't there, I think. But yes, you're right. So he really was part of this, an art world that's also is very, very elitist. I mean, it's it's a very funny film to see after the documentary. In some ways, they're identical, right, about humanity being discovered by the end of the movie. But yeah, it's very apolitical in lots of ways, and so a lot of the leftists didn't like it. So he got attacked by leftists who just thought, this has nothing to do with social anything, it's just this play with visual stuff. And it really was anticipating the Art Deco movement. He had already knew that in 1925 was going to be the big exhibition in Art Deco, and he's working with a bunch of people on the set for this who are going to be in that show. He was on the jury for that show. So some people say he was really bringing together and collaborating with such a wide variety of artists, but he was also thinking, okay, the next new art movement is going to be Art Deco. We're moving out of Art Nouveau and the Lalique kind of stuff you see here and there, and away from Cubism and some of that.
But Lalique was one of the designers of this stuff in the movie.
That's true.
That's
yes.
amazing.
Yes.
There's so many amazing things that they predicted in the movie. I could not believe that we were watching television in 1924, and it's in the subtitles from 1924. I didn't know the word television even existed then,
I've been, from the first time I saw this film, I started to go, well, what's the relationship of him and the invention of television? So I started doing a little research. Apparently television had been sort of talked about, but not by that name. As best I can find out, this is the first time the word television gets put in there. And certainly nobody thought of television as the thing you can watch the audience with while they're listening to the radio. So,
yeah.
To talk about to the musicians, composers for a moment, one of the amazing things about this movie, where it becomes obvious they're trying to match the highbrow and the lowbrow, has to do with the editing, because the first sequence of the movie is like 45 minutes. That never happened in silent films. And then at the end of the movie, you have this cutting that's so fast, it's the exact opposite. I mean, in creating the music for that, how do you do that? I mean, you have to switch gears for these such severely extreme types of scenes within one movie.
Well, needless to say, that once we get to the laboratory and the car chase scenes, it's a lot easier for us than the 45 minutes of preliminary. But for us, the main thing was to try to come up with as many different sounds as we possibly could. What we generally do is with the synthesizer, especially, is we have orchestral sounds or piano or organ or more normal sounds. And this time it was like, we got to dig into that synthesizer and get as weird as we possibly can. And so that was our real goal early on. And I don't know if it's true, but we feel like the slow scenes at the beginning that we really have to help it along and propel it along, whereas once it really kicks in, we're just kind of holding on for dear life. So it's it was interesting in a different approach for us, but it was really fun to try to come up with all these different sounds and blending different synthesizer sounds and what weird ambient percussion sounds we were going to use.
How do you match the period?
We don't. Well, in this case, in a way, we did, because we were looking to bring the avant-garde back into this movie, and so not just melodic stuff. We start avant-garde, and our effort is usually to rein ourselves back in to follow the movie. This time, there was no reining required. But we typically do music that's sort of divorced from a time period. You know, we don't play rock and roll, we don't play bebop, we don't play orchestral music. Roger, who's out selling product in the front, including this movie on Blu-ray with our score, Roger described us as being classical music with a rock attitude. And it's kind of the way it is. But we don't usually study the music in advance. We don't too much try to do the exact music that would have been done at the same time.
Because L'Herbier knew Debussy, right? I think, and things like that. So I didn't know. Yeah. So there isn't an attempt to try to make some kind of impressionist music as much.
Well,
here.
there was a score for this by Darius Milhaud. Darius Milhaud is a modernist French composer who I started listening to more after we started doing this film, and it's really easy to see how he would have chosen him to do this film. It was like right in the pocket of the time and the style. So. But it's lost.
This movie had more designers involved. I mean, the top artists in the world were involved with this movie. It was obvious this was a man who took these huge risks, just huge. And then it was a disaster, but then he moved on to the next one, I don't know how much you know about L'Herbier. I don't know a lot about him, but I do know that what he did was, after he had this disaster, he would go on to the next film, and some would do well, some wouldn't. He owned this company called the Cinematograph. But then, he lived to be a very old man. He lived until he was like 91, I think. And when it became that people no longer believed in him, especially the financiers, in making movies, he joined the administration of the French government. He is the person that was so influential in the government passing laws to acclaim filmmakers as the authors of a film. And he became very influential in authors' rights, in filmmakers' rights. So he lived so many different lives, this man that I only found out about him in the last couple of years. It's just fascinating, these guys that we don't really know about, and then you see a movie like this, and it opens up all these worlds.
And you mentioned the design, and as I mentioned before, there's three really big name people doing designs. Miley Stevens does the outsides. Cavalcanti is going to do the interiors, and Fernand Léger, who did many different kinds of mobile art as well as paintings and things. But after this, he was so inspired with his big sets with those, especially whatever that machine is at the end with all the stuff going on, that right soon after this, he made his famous movie Ballet Mécanique, the mechanical ballet that is usually playing in every museum around the world all day long, over and over and over. So he got really fascinated more and more. Instead of just being an artist who did sets and architecture and painting and maybe some mobiles, again, he's another example of that, trying to get into kinetic art. What is it the cinema can do that I can't do in other media? So again, L'Herbier was a collaborator with all these different people. He had all kinds of weird visions, and people say every movie is just about in the teens. I've seen a bunch of them, but not all. They're all very, very different, different kinds of styles. He has different people influence him on each one. So he is sort of hectic at his career, even in the 20s. So yes, he's got a very long, strange career. He helped the technician unions in the 1930s as part of the Popular Front and things like that too. So he was this very wealthy person. He cared about the workers. He cared about as you say, the rights of filmmakers. So yeah, he's a fascinating individual, and not that much is known of him. That's true.
My understanding is he was a very old friend of the actress, that he met her when he was very, very young, and she was, of course, maybe 20 years older than him. And
yeah, she was with Maeterlinck, was his mistress apparently for years, or at least they were together for years and years. And he was a symbolist poet, L'Herbier, so I think he met her through her, and he wrote theater early on. And then again, he wanted to get away from the sort of conventions of theater, and he also said, and away from that sort of, what's the word he used, but basically the heavy psychological realism of fiction and conventional cinema. So he really wanted to break away from the barriers of theater and break away from psychological realism. Yeah, the characters here are not characters; they're sort of shapes, and they move around almost like somebody out of an expressionist film.
But my impression was his relationship with her, she fostered this in him when he was a very young man. And when they came to him, she and her husband came to him to propose this film. She was pretty popular, I think, opera singer, wasn't she?
Yes, she was a well-known opera singer, and she really did go back and forth to America. So at one point, she had to leave and come back during the production. But yes, so she was a well-known person. But yes, he also said she didn't move the way he wanted. She wasn't the age he wanted for an actress in this role, and that he made it even more abstract than I think in some ways. But.
I remember the first time I saw this movie, and I didn't know anything about it, and I saw her, and I said, wow, in the 20s, they liked their ingenues really, really young. I was just trying to rationalize it, it was like a cultural reason for all of it, and then I found out she financed the film, and she was, on the condition she would star in every frame of the movie.
And it was a very expensive film, so she put up a lot of money, of her own money, and lost it. But so representing her voice
We decided pretty quickly that her voice was a very powerful character in this film, so we decided to use the musical saw as her voice. Well, yeah, it seems like the natural thing to do, and it has that beautiful yet eerie yet creepy yet why doesn't it stop sound that I think people sort of felt when you were watching her sing at the same time. So it just seemed like the perfect match.
Yeah, because sometimes it's that odious music or whatever, like they're supposed to, here's this irritating music when it keeps cutting back and forth to the turntable, and she's supposed to be uncomfortable.
Yes, we specialize in irritating. But yes, that was definitely a shift. It had been more spooky and beautifully spooky, and then it definitely stepped up, and that's a big cue for us when she hears the gramophone record, and now it's like dig in, and I think my note even says that, dig in at that gramophone and make it creepy and really disturbing as much as we could.
You see film techniques in this movie that we tend to give directors credit for that came long after or after him, like the depth of focus, depth of feel, and the deep focus. I'm sure filmmakers used it before, but when you see it in this film, you go, wow, I remember when Orson Welles was given credit for that, and this is 15 years earlier,
I'll be the second person this week to say, yeah, Orson Welles is the most overrated director in history.
No,
but anyway,
no, don't do that.
All right.
I don't
anyway,
agree with that.
But no, it's really true. There's depth in some shots. There's incredible flatness in others. That shallow focus where people go in and out of focus. In addition to the framing and those things. Yeah, but it really is the fast editing that the Soviets really picked up on this. So you guys have done the wonderful
Did the
Vertov.
Soviets come before or after this, or was it
After
in the middle?
this.
After.
Yeah, so it's
After.
25.
Wow.
1925 is Potemkin or a strike, and so they're strongly influenced by what the French are doing as well, and the French are watching what everybody else is doing too. It's this real international kind of thing going on in the 20s.
One of the parts of the filmmaking that always impresses me is the way he deals with complex sort of emotional states between different people all within the same scene. It's a very D.W. Griffith kind of an idea, but in that early long scene, Einar is, beyond himself and he's so upset that she won't pay attention. She's flitting around to all these other characters. Then there's the fire eaters and the dancers in the front, and then those crazy costumed waiters who where they come from. So, and it was actually quite difficult for us. It's like, well, with all these changes of emotions that happen so fast, if you do that musically, you've kind of wrecked the whole mood. You can't really go back and forth to those things. So we decided to sort of pick one mood and allow we usually use Einar as our kind of character that we work with, and use this kind of somber, he's depressed, he can't get her.
He also has those blank stares. Like,
Yeah.
what kind of music do you put with a blank stare of him just going, oh, and now she's talking to him. She's talking to him.
And then it cuts to the fire eater, and we're thinking, well, that's sort of wrong, but it's, he's doing this on purpose to show, the different range of emotions that are happening in the room at the time.
But I think that seems actually a good example for me of what you do bring to the film that's unique and stuff is that, there is that jazz band playing. And on the one hand, yes, you've got kind of frenetic music going, but it's not like you're trying to recreate a sort of Dixieland jazz sound. of the era.
Right, and we think about that, and that's usually one of the things that are most discussed is, all right, they're showing this jazz band. All right, clearly we know what they're playing, but that's not us. So it's one of those instances where you know it's there, so you don't really have to do it. You can try to grab onto the emotions that are going on around it. We might hint at it in a peppy sort of way, but then, cut away from it pretty quickly. And usually those scenes, and you see that jazz band, they come in for a second. They come in, and then they come in for another second. So if we were to go that route, it would be way too frenetic for way too long, way too early in the film. So that's why we try to hint at it and go away. It's one of those, it's there, so you don't really have to hit them with it.
I mean, ultimately, it's the most incredible, biggest, epic, experimental film ever made, If you have a chance, now you should see L'Argent, which is a movie he made in 1928. And my feeling is he learned a lot as he went along. And there's a perfection to that movie, and it is every bit as epic as this movie. And I saw L'Argent immediately following the U.S., the last world economic crisis, about 2008, whenever that was. And L'Argent is all about that. And it's an amazing film. So after you see this, you should see that.
It's a great tip, yes. It's been a long time since I've watched it. Other stuff?
I was wondering if there's any questions. Are we doing questions with the audience? Was there some up front? Yeah.
So when you first saw it,
Is that one not working either?
And
All right.
we can repeat it.
when you first saw this movie, what music did you picture as the movie before you started composing your type of music for the movie?
So he's wondering what your first impulses were when you saw it in terms of musical inspiration.
We actually, I can't exactly explain why, but we actually started going back to some of our previous scores and pulling out some of the avant-garde, pop hits that we've done, thinking that, that was obviously the direction we needed to go. And so we pulled some things from a couple previous movies that had gotten very little play, a film called Chinelle, I forget which one, Morning to Midnight. So anyway, we were picking and choosing among our kind of repertoire, and those gave us kind of a tone and a style to work from. 95% of the music in this is composed brand new for this film, but we pulled from some older stuff which we thought would really work with the tone.
Was Morning to Midnight, was that the Czech film? What
No,
was that?
Morning to Midnight is the
German.
German expressionist film.
right, yeah, it's
I'm trying to
20,
remember. Just after
1920
Nosferatu,
German.
just after Caligari, actually.
Chinelle was the Russian.
From the balcony in the center.
How long did it take you to score this film?
Usually we're deadline oriented, but we did have a pretty good head start. Generally, we take 3 to 4 months to write and rehearse and get these things ready. The hardest part is playing the first note. And then once we get rolling, it's, scene by scene, we're getting basic ideas and recording those basic ideas. And then once we get to the end, we go back and say, were we full of it that day, or does this actually work? And then you're molding each scene one by one. And then we go back and the real trick is to try to make all those whatever 200 cues or whatever they are into one smooth performance. So it's ever evolving as we go along, and even as we play it live, it's constantly a work in progress within a very strict sort of structure. But generally 3 to 4 months to score each film that we do.
And it is real collaborative. The three of you all.
Yes,
It's not like one person does most composition.
right,
and the
right.
other
It's
give a
I
little
think it's
influence.
really unique in that respect. It's completely collaborative. We watch the movie together once it's decided, and then we sit down and start to play. We just watch the first film or watch the first scene, and ideally we just come up with it instinctually and with an improv idea. Although this one took a lot more discussion than normal. But again, somebody will come up with a basic idea, and then everyone else will sort of join in, and then discuss how to mold it. That's where the discussions really get in, how to mold it to fit within this scene and where it might need to shift. And so it's a very interesting kind of way that we do this, and which I think really helps with a live performance, having it not be one person just scoring the film and everyone just playing their parts. It's a very interactive experience, and then we spend more time looking at the film than we do looking at our music and then responding to each other too. So it's like Ken said before, classical music with a rock and roll attitude, but with the freedom of jazz. So it's and then within the structure of that movie's going every time, so you want to be along with the movie.
You know, these guys made me realize how vital the music is to these silent films. I remember I used to see a movie like Man Without a Camera. Is that the name of that? Yeah.
Man with a movie camera.
Man with a movie camera, and not liking it, you know. But when I saw these guys play the music with it, I realized the reason I didn't like it is the score that was the track on the bad VHS that I was watching was just a horrendous score, and it ruined the experience.
We've had so many film professors come up to us and say, thank you for scoring this film, because I have to show it every semester, and finally people are staying awake through it.
Strike.
So-
Strike's a good example because
Strike
it's
is another
constructivist
example,
sound,
yeah.
and I knew for my students at least, strike is just
So you know, each film,
Nice
and see, also that's the beauty of the freedom to do whatever music you want to these films, because you could see any of these films 50 different ways with 50 different musics, and each time it would make you feel different. So
What's been the most impossible one you've worked on or you've given up on?
we never give up.
All right.
We never give up. They're all really daunting until you get into them. Every single time we look at them, it's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? You know, and this one especially, I think, was very daunting. It's like, you know, it's 2 hours plus. How are we going to find the right mood for every one? I mean, some of them sort of write themselves. The General, Buster Keaton, Metropolis. You know, it's like I said before, it's just holding on tight and going along for the ride. And then one like this, you really have to kind of work a little harder to go along for that ride. So, but on the other hand, if people always ask what's my favorite, and it's always the one that we've just done. So, and the beauty of what we do is we get to play so many different kinds of musics depending on the film. So if you're just writing music as music, you're not going to be pushed in the directions that we are, like last year with The Son of the Sheik. Drastically different score than this, which is drastically different than Variete, which we're working on next. I can't tell you what we're playing in Telluride this year, but I can tell you we're working on Variete, and it'll be shown immediately afterwards. So,
My favorite one is Lonesome. I've seen it 4 times, and it's one of the most romantic experiences of your life with their score. It's amazing.
I've got a question here.
Hi. I was just curious, you were sort of talking about your preparation for the, about 4 months or so before I'm working on the score. And it seems you definitely have these like through composed thematic cues you're developing throughout the whole process. And I was wondering, in that context, like how much of a sway do you find performance to performance? Are you ever surprised by what you're doing? Is there room to stretch out in a film this long? Just
There's definitely room to stretch out, but time to time, they don't vary all that much. So we have very specific cues, and we know when this scene starts, we're going to be playing this piece of music. When this scene ends, we're moving to this piece of music, and that's pretty much written in stone. You know, every now and then somebody misses a cue, and we just run over. But within those scenes, there can be a fair amount of improvisation. You know when it starts and stops, and you kind of know the melody maybe you're going to play or the rhythm, but that allows you a lot of flexibility. For instance, in Metropolis, there's a huge chase scene. I think it lasts about 4 hours or something like that. And Terry and I are just banging on all this stuff, just ferociously. And it started off, we just changed around. We did all these things. We had all these new ideas. Now, we've done 500 performances of Metropolis, and it would be really interesting to hear in 4 different versions. Yeah, it'd be really interesting to hear what we did 10 years ago. I suspect it hasn't changed that much on these scenes, but we still are improvising along with it.
Have you done a version with this longest version?
Yes. Right here on this very stage.
And it's for sale right up at the...
All right.
No, it's not. Oh, yes, it is. I'm sorry. We were never allowed to put our soundtrack on the movie because the copyright owner in Germany really didn't want that, so we issued and it's too long for a CD or any other format, so we issued a MP3 CD that runs the entire length of the film, and if you start it at the exact same time as the first title, it'll stay together. So we sell them as a package out there.
Question up front to your left here.
Yeah, it's always interesting to watch these movies, but it's equally as interesting to watch you people play. It's just unbelievable. Now, I'm wondering, when you play all over the world, are they as lucky as we are to get to watch you in action?
Well, yes, and sometimes they get even a better view because generally what we try to do is set up right on the stage, sort of sideways. So we're right up there. Logistically, with going from film to film, and it would be a nightmare for our crack crew here, who does an excellent job every year. One of the smoothest operating tech crews that we experienced all over the world. Not to mention the projection, which is always, we get the best projectors in the world. That makes our job easier, but generally we would prefer to be up on the stage, so you have a chance to really see us in action. But on the other hand, the best compliment we hear is, we completely forgot you were there. And at the same time, the best compliment is, next time I'm going to watch the movie. So just the live aspect of it, and the fact that we're up here doing it all at the same time, sometimes we're really riding on the precipice of disaster, but it's like any live experience. It makes it a lot more vibrant and vital and interesting. So thank you.
I've got a question to the back, to your right.
Did he or she go on to sound films? The director, or Georgette, did she go do sound films?
Yes. Yeah, he went on to, in the 1930s, did a number of sound films, some a little more experimental, but he got kind of more mainstream in terms of sound and image kind of combination. But he also did go on and do documentaries. He did a wide variety of things. But yes, he did continue into the sound era. They didn't come out quite as quickly as the silence, one after the other. And especially for France, sound was an incredibly expensive proposition. So it really slowed production for a while. But yes, he did go on to make sound films. And he also, which I was going to say before, he also said in the silent era that putting together a film is like composing ideas in like for music, but with images. So there was that sense that words are inappropriate, words are old-fashioned. We can speak better with silent images and the music to go with it. He still had that faith in it.
We kind of count on that for the films we work with. We tend to work with the best of the silent era, and the directors have figured out the flow of emotions and action in a very symphonic fashion. So people say, well, how do you know how to, bring the film to a climax, how to raise and lower the, the energy of it? And we don't really have to think about it that much because the directors have done a spectacular job. So we sort of just follow the direction of the film, typically, and it's usually fabulous. Now, I don't think that would happen if we played
But when
everything.
you watch these films without music, do you have a sense of a director that you feel while you're watching it, oh, that director is more in sync with music than other directors?
Mostly, I
More
feel
rhythmic.
like I just don't even get why anybody would watch these films. When you watch them without music, half of the information's gone. Half of the timing is screwed up. When you have a 40 minutes long scene, which that really was, you're expecting that the musicians are going to keep introducing new ideas into it and change the mood and the emotions of the film. And without the music, it's very flat. And so I've watched this film 20 years ago without any music on it at all, and I said,
It's a tough
I don't
slog.
know.
It really is. But also, just to bring back to that whole notion of pure cinema and impressionism, I mean, they did say, Rene Clair, the great silent filmmaker, just said, cinema should do what you can never do with words. And L'Herbier really believed that as well, that it should be doing something, a narration shouldn't help, but music should.
Do you know who the cinematographer on this one was, and how much did L'Herbier have to do with that?
Sprecht. He was somebody who'd done all kinds of silent comedies, actually, in France. He had a lot of serial comedies, not the Foyades, but at Gaumont. So he did a wide variety of stuff. So he was a real veteran cinematographer. So this has got to be just like way out of his league in terms of the kind of stuff he's doing. But he was a veteran who had done all kinds of fast-paced comedies, the Léonce series and stuff like that. So he was a Gaumont professional cinematographer.
As I watch these things over and over again, you start to dig into the details. And the cinematography in this one just continues to blow me away. There's so many off-kilter shots where he's got the subject literally in the corner of the film here. And there's this huge blank space, a couple of lines shooting through, and it's a lovely composition, but it's like, who would have thought to do it that way?
And also, it's a good example of what Del Toro was talking about the other night, of how design and cinematography and everything has to work together. There's the one shot where the Maharaja is getting angry and walking away, while way in the background in the green room is Einar and Claire, and there's like this big hanging white plant thing, or big huge flower or something that mirrors his tunic as he's walking away. So there's, the cinematography is just, it almost looks like his head breaks in two, that one part's still back there and the other part he's walking away. The cinematography, I think, is just amazing, and not only the framing, but the depth and play with certain objects. I mean, there's times when those big wheels are spinning in front of Claire's face, and then you cut to a different angle, and there's nothing anywhere near her. So it's a real fanciful kind of space, too.
And the cinematography in those exterior scenes are amazing, in the car and on the road. And
The way they bend the background and stuff, which I still have no idea how they did. But Kristen Thompson wrote a long article about this, and she emphasized his use of wide-angle lenses, which was very uncommon at the time. And
Kristen Thompson, who's often here with David Bordwell, she's got a great blog that I assume it was in part because of you coming here, I don't know, but she just released it last week. So at David Bordwell's blog, I really encourage you to read it. It's beautifully illustrated, too.
I guess we're ready to wrap. One more.
One more.
Over there.
Maybe two more. So we have one here, and then we'll do.
All right. Wait 1 second.
This may be a kind of a strange question, but there's one scene before Claire's concert, when the other guys are plotting against her, where they have the young man on the lounge with the older lady. Yeah. So who is that guy? It's not Einar, right? It's not Einar.
There's a couple representative scenes of people reading in the newspaper about, the young man died and this other woman. Yeah, and there's that young guy who looks a lot like Einar, right? And then there's this older woman, kind of, you think, his mother saying, you know. And then, she leans in and kisses him. I think it's a then they cut to a couple other sort of typical people. Then you go to the women making sausage. And she's got no gut, no guts.
And, it says the same word in French is for, just like courage. But it's about, the internal parts of an
So
animal
I
you would
think,
eat.
to me, it's several samples of people who are reacting to this of different, and here's this guy, either he's with some older prostitute, or I couldn't tell what it was either, I don't know. But it's showing everybody's got different morals, and they're all disgusted by her.
And I love the bit when she's singing her thing over the radio, and there's the painter painting his model, and then they get in this little tiff. It's like it was such a funny little detail.
She's
I
trying
guess
to move a little, and he
right.
wants
She
her to
wants,
be
yeah.
static.
There's a lot of decadence in this movie.
There we go. Okay, one more here.
Up front here.
Yep. Just a different question. You work within the silent film genre, but I was just curious. Have you ever thought of like taking a modern, more current movie, wipe the sound and everything, and redo it that way? I mean, I think of the only one is Stanley Kubrick's 2001, which to me that's the first one that comes to mind, where it's almost exclusively all music except for a few limited dialogue. So I think it would be interesting because the way you guys bring the emotion out just through the music is absolutely incredible. I mean, it's captivating.
Well, thank you. I think if we did 2001, we would get, there'd be a lynch mob. I think the fear for us is, and early on in our career, when we were doing this and doing modern scores, people were afraid that we were making fun of these movies. There was a fear that we would be like the, what's that show where they sit in the back, the space show, and they Mystery Science Theater, and it's like we really tried to prove that we were not in any way making fun of these films. I know Philip Glass has done it a couple times with Dracula, which had basically no music, but I just don't think that it needs it. If it's already a talkie and already has its sound on it, then I'd rather go back and do. There's always another really cool silent movie coming up next. So unless Spielberg wants to hire us, then I think we're doing silent films.
I've said it a million times. I think we're ready for the next Terminator film. I'm waiting for the phone call. I said that
you could be available.
I said that we were ready for Terminator 2 and it didn't happen. Then I started saying 3. I've lost count, but I think we're on 4. Okay, well, my phone is
Terminator 5, man, we're
my
there.
phone's on vibrate, but I'll answer it if anybody.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen.
It's great fun.